and welcome to this 4NAV coffee break. My name is René Brummel. I'm a product specialist at 4NAV and I will be your presenter today. As this coffee break is live, you can ask your questions via the GoToWebinar question window. We will answer them at the end of the coffee break. Today we're going to explain how to set up 4NAV source control for Azure DevOps. Source control can be described as a time machine for your 4NAV setup. It keeps track of every version of your work, so mistakes are not permanent. It makes teamwork easy. Everyone can work on the same project without overwriting each other. All changes are tracked by the source control system, so you can see who did what, when, and why. Source control helps to deploy image changes from test to production. It gives you full control over what to deploy and when to do it. To demonstrate source control for Azure DevOps, I'm going to use these steps. The prerequisites, what do I need to get going? In step 2, I will set up source control. In step 3, I will work with changes local and remote. In step 4, I will deploy my changes to production. Let's start with the first step. Today I will be working on a Business Central on-premise server with the Business Central 2025 Wave 2 release. I've installed the 4NAV customizable report pack and I've executed the step-by-step wizard from the assisted setup to get started. I have a project and a repository for Azure DevOps, and I've set up an app registration so I can connect from Business Central. Of course, everything I do today will also work in a cloud environment. The first thing we need to do to set up is an app registration so Business Central users can connect to Azure DevOps. Setting up an app registration is very well documented, and the only step that requires specific setup is the API permission. The API user needs permissions to connect to Azure DevOps. The next step is to set up 4NAV so it can connect to Azure DevOps. To demonstrate this, I have my Azure DevOps tenant, and in there I have a 4NAV test project. And in the 4NAV test project, I have a repository with also called 4NAV test, with where I can store all of the files that I want. You can see I don't have anything in here apart from a simple README file. You don't specifically need a completely empty repository. It can already have files in there. It can have extensions and everything in there because we can store files in a completely separate folder from Business Central. So next step is going to Business Central. This is my Business Central test system, and in here I have set up 4NAV, and you can see I have some custom layouts, my 4NAV setup. You can see I have some logos, payment notes, and that sort of stuff. So just a fairly typical setup with some stuff in my 4NAV setup. To set up source control, I'm going to open source control. And the first thing I need to do, you can see there's nothing in here yet, is to set up. You can choose which types of 4NAV setup you want to store in the backup. I have enabled everything apart from report selection, and there's no real reason why you shouldn't add report selection, but there's a lot of files and it takes more time to synchronize. And I just want to move quickly today, so I switched that one off, left everything else on. Then I can choose my provider, which is going to be Azure DevOps. Then I need to set up some stuff. I need a tenant ID, client ID, and a client secret. And those are all part of the app registration process. And I have made a note of that stuff on my other screen. So I grab my tenant ID, I grab my client ID, and I grab my client secret. Then I need to add my organization. And the organization, if you look at your Azure DevOps, you can see dev.azure.com/redandbundle. Redandbundle is my organization. So I will paste that in manually, and then I can log into Azure DevOps and choose from my list of projects. I'm going to use the 4NAV test. Then you need to choose a source provider. If you don't know what to choose, you need to choose Git. If you do have something else set up, then you can choose that from this lookup list. The default in Azure DevOps is Git, and that's what I'm using. Then I need to choose a repository, which is also 4NAV test, and I can choose a base folder. Which is going to be coffee break, and I'm going to allow push because I want to push my changes from this test database into source control. That's all I need to set up. And then I go back into source control. You can see that as soon as I chose a source control provider, 4nav loaded a list of current changes for me. At the moment, everything is add local because this is the initial load. This is all of the setup that I currently have in the system. I'm going to stage it all. I'm going to commit it with the message initial load and commit. And then the next step, of course, is to push everything into source control. Push at the moment is grayed out. I can't push anything because I haven't chosen a branch yet. In my source control, I have two branches. I have test and main. And the idea is that I am going to add my changes in my test database to the test branch. And then when everything is done, I'm going to do a pull request to main and pull from main into my production database. So I'm going to choose the test branch. Then I can push everything. Which takes a little while. But as soon as it's done, we can go to our Azure DevOps again. And you can see that I now have a folder called coffee break. And in this folder, first of all, I have a 4nav init.json. And the 4nav init tells me that this folder is used by 4nav to store 4nav setup. It has some settings in there. That's provider 3, which is Azure DevOps. It has a version and it has a list of companies. And because, as you can see in the layouts, for instance, a lot of the 4nav setup is very company specific. We compare whenever we do a pull from Azure DevOps or another source control. We compare the list of companies that we have stored in Azure DevOps to the companies that are in Business Central, just to make sure that we can actually load the backup that's in source control. I have all of my setup in here. I have, for instance, my layouts. This is the custom layout for the 4nav order confirmation. My setup, where we store the document watermark and the logo, and the setup with the payment notes and everything. So everything we have in Business Central is now pushed into our source control system. Now we have set up source control. We can see what happens when we add and modify setup in Business Central and on the remote. So let's start with going back to Business Central and doing some changes. I have, for instance, a custom layout, which I'm just going to change. So let's take this background, make it yellow, save and activate. And of course, we have the new 4nav email templates. I can make a change in there as well. Let's say if I make a mistake, and close it. So I've made some changes. I go back to my 4nav source control. You can see that we now have two edits. I have an edit in the layout 4nav JSON for the 4nav order confirmation, and I have an edit in my email template. We can compare them. And in the compare, if I scroll down a bit, there we go. You can see that the background color has changed from orange to yellow, and that's fine. I'm happy with that. I can stage this one. As I change address background and commit it, and now that's done. It's committed in my local repository. And then we have the email template that's been changed. If I hit compare, you can see the description has been changed from sales invoice to a mistake. This is obviously a mistake, so we're going to roll this one back. I'm going to say discard. Do you want to discard these changes? Yeah, of course I do. Which means that in my email templates, my description has now been changed back to sales invoice. And then we want to push our changes into Azure DevOps. Which means if we go to Azure DevOps and look at the 4nav JSON, you can see this has now been updated just now. and the background color is now yellow. Then while we are in Azure DevOps, we want to make some changes on the remote system as well. And this can be done obviously by connecting it to a development system and pushing changes, but in this case, we'll make this easy. We're just going to edit some local stuff. Going to change the payment node to cough up. Commit it. We're going to change the legal conditions. 3 exclamation marks is a bit much. So let's change that one. Hit commit. So change some stuff on my remote, which means if I go back to my source control and do a pull, it loads the diff for all of the files, and you can see I have 2 changes. I have a change in my legal conditions. If I hit compare, you can see that my exclamation marks were changed. That's perfectly fine. Change the legal conditions, do a commit. Have a look at the payment note. Hit compare. Please pay has been changed to cough up. That's obviously not something that I want to send to my customers. So I'm going to hit discard on this one. Which means that the remote change has now been rolled back. So if I go to my payment note again, you can see that's been changed to please pay on the remote. If you want to see what we have been doing, you can hit show all, and that will give us a full list of all of the source control entries. And if you want to see the history of this stuff, so let's say I want the history of my legal conditions, I can find my commit entries. You can see this stuff has been changed. It's been changed by me, but I'm the admin and I don't have a username in the system, so you can't see that. But you can see everything that's been going on and when it was changed. You can also see that obviously I've prepped this coffee break earlier today. Finally, we are ready to deploy our setup to production. And to do that, we need to create a pull request to merge our changes to the main branch, and then we can set up and pull from source control in our production database. So we go back to our source control, create a pull request. We're pulling from test into main. You can see we have 10 files that have been added. I'm going to call this coffee break and complete the pull, which means if I go back into my files in my main branch, I now have my coffee break folder with the all of the things that we need. Then I can go to my production database. This is called BC prod. Obviously, it's also a Docker container. This is a brand new container. I've just spun it up half an hour ago. I've installed ForNav and I've done nothing else in it. In here, I go to source control. I go to setup, disable the report selection just to make sure we match. Setup for Azure DevOps. Do our setup again, tenant ID, username, client secret, organization. Then we can log in. You can see this is a brand new container, so I actually need to log in into Azure DevOps. If you have logged in, Business Central will cache your login details for a couple of hours. I will choose the ForNav test. Repository is ForNav test. Base folder is coffee break. And I'll leave allow push on false because this is a production database and I don't want to push anything from here into DevOps. I just want to pull everything that's staged for release. Choose a branch, which is main this time. And as soon as I choose a branch, we get a pull from Azure DevOps. And you can see that all of my setup from Azure DevOps is being loaded. So you can see I have, for instance, the payment node. I don't have an origin because it's not in this system yet, but I do have a delta, which is please pay, which is what we did. We'll stage all. say initial load from remote and hit commit. That means if I now go to my 4NAV standard reports, we have the custom layout for our order. We have the email template that we worked on. And in the 4NAV setup, I have my payment notes, I have my logo, and I have my document watermark, exactly like I set it up in my test system. Let's recap what we just did. We have set up a connection to the Azure DevOps source control system. To connect to Azure DevOps, we had to create an app registration with the correct permissions. And once we had that, we could connect with the client ID and secret. Once we were connected, we could push our existing setup, and we could add changes to the remote and to the local system and use push and pull to synchronize. We could also discard local or remote changes. And finally, we connected our production database and pulled all of the settings we stored on the remote. Thank you very much for listening to me so far. I can see we don't have any questions. If you do have any burning questions, just add them to the question window and I will answer them before I close this coffee break. If you want to know more about 4NAV, or if you want to download the 4NAV toolbox, please visit our website. If you want to install 4NAV in Business Central Cloud, please visit Microsoft App Source. You can watch more videos about 4NAV on our YouTube channel, and if you have any questions about 4NAV, please email them to support@4nav.com. For a full list of upcoming and recorded coffee breaks, please visit 4nav.com/coffeebreak. And with that, thank you very much for joining me today, and goodbye.